Good morning and welcome to FSM 4301, Management and Leadership in Dietetics 2. I'm Sharon Hunter and I'll be your instructor this semester. This is one of my favorite subjects to teach because I believe that the skills that you learn and the knowledge that you gain in this class are going to make you a well-rounded, versatile professional. While we use many food service examples, this class isn't just about learning how to run a kitchen. It's about gaining the executive business sense, the leadership and management skills, and the systems level thinking that you need to excel in any aspects of the dietetics career field. In your previous food service management courses, you learned many of the technical aspects of food service. As you can see from our course objectives, this semester we're going to address the strategic and operational management in dietetics practice. We're going to look at managing workflows, cost control, risk mitigation, how to make data-driven decisions, and looking at professional standards. You will have a capstone project that is phased throughout the semester where you'll work as a team to develop a disaster management plan for your food service organization. I'm also excited that we will have several guest speakers this semester. You'll have the opportunity to interact with clinical managers, food service directors, and even an RDN CEO who will provide insight on their clinical path, but then also provide you with real life experiences or scenarios, their real life experiences, and how they communicate, how they manage and lead on a day-to-day basis. And we'll also continue to look at the food service organization as a system. And that's where we're beginning today. That's why I have this particular objective highlighted or bolded on your screen, that we're going to apply systems level frameworks and systems thinking frameworks to examine how organizational subsystems interact and influence food service outcomes. We're also going to touch on, of course, how managers impact, how their decisions impact and influence that system, and how those actions influence the food service outcomes. Who can tell me what they remember about systems theory from previous classes? Yes, there is an emphasis on the relationship of the organization to its environment. Organizations are collections of interrelated parts called subsystems. They're highly complex, typically, and they don't operate in a vacuum. They're not self-sustaining. They're interdependent on other functions, and managers have to recognize the interrelationships of the parts of the system and look at the broader perspective. And you'll recognize this figure from your textbook that you would have seen in the previous class. This is the food service system model that illustrates the applications of systems theory to a food service organization and expands on that basic graphic that we just saw in the previous slide. Within the food service organization, or within the food service system, we have what are called functional subsystems. And this is just an example. Depending on the facility, they may have different names, but you can see that each of these subsystems within the system make that food service organization work. It helps that food service organization to meet their mission, to meet their goals. And something else to keep in mind, that we are talking about food service, or I'm talking about food service as a system, but we can also think about that food service is essentially a subsystem within the larger system of the hospital in which it resides. And now we talked about how the food service is a function of its environment, and it reacts and responds to the influences of the environment. And those influences could be internal from our functional subsystems, or they could be external from the bigger system that we live in, such as the hospital. So an example might be if the diet office is unable to print the menu tickets for whatever reason, then the tray line might start late. So that is an internal environmental factor that can affect that subsystem. An external example might be if the computer system goes down in the entire hospital, then Are there manual backups in place for ordering diets, for creating meal tickets? What is our backup plan in order to be able to continue to do our job if some part of that external subsystem malfunctions as well? So we think that, in a perfect world, let me move this. In a perfect world, our system is going to work perfectly. And we know that that doesn't happen. But, ideally, the staff are trained, they show up to work on time, ready to work. The equipment's always working, nothing ever breaks down. Everything and everybody is where it's supposed to be when it's supposed to be there. And nothing ever goes wrong. But like I said, we don't live in a perfect world. So look at some of these scenarios. These are real world scenarios that have caused major impact to food service systems or to food operations, food and nutrition operations. Just take a quick look and I'll read through them right quickly. 3 nutrition educators from your WIC clinic have come down with a foodborne illness. They went out to dinner together, co-workers and friends, and they're now all unable to come to work. It's the end of the month and your schedule is full of clients who need to be recertified to get their benefits. What are you going to do? Another example is there's a disaster. Could be blizzard, hurricane, ice storm, flood, fire. Your prime vendor, the person who delivers your food and supplies, can't make it through until the roads are clear. And to make it worse, not all employees are able to make it to work for the first shift. So what do you do? And then another example, routine maintenance on the sprinkler system at your hospital resulted in a burst water pipe over your dish room. So you've got employees in the dish room. It's the middle of a meal period. The dish room is in full swing. The ceiling is caving in. The employees are in a short period of time up to their ankles in water. And there is a door that from that dish room that leads into the dining room. So you've got patrons out there in the cafeteria. What do you do? Well, I was going to have us talk through one of these scenarios, but what I'd rather do is talk about a current event. So who can tell me what has been in the news for several days that has potentially impacted food service operations throughout the nation? Yes, the cyclosporiasis outbreak. Up until today, there have been, the public health officials have known that it is related to the consumption of cyclospora parasite in fresh produce, but they couldn't narrow it down to a particular type of produce or a source for that produce. So all that we were told is be careful with your fresh produce. Cook it if possible. Don't eat certain types of food. If you buy a whole head of lettuce instead of the chopped lettuce, tear off the outer layers. Don't buy pre-washed, or if you buy pre-washed, go ahead and wash it. Well, how is that impacting a food service organization? Take a minute to think about that, and then we'll discuss what your thoughts are. All right, so let's talk about some of the things that you came up with about how that's going to impact a food service operation. So the first thing that you came up with were that there would be some necessary menu changes because the recommendation is to cook produce, no fresh fruits and vegetables. So potentially you've got wasted food. You can cook some things, but we're not going to cook our lettuce, especially you can't use it in another way. So there's a potential for lost revenue. Also, if you're changing your menu because you have a lot of fresh fruits and vegetables on your menu and perhaps you can't cook them all, there's a demand on the vendor for replacements. You may be competing with all the other food service organizations in your area for food from that same vendor. Um, so that is a possibility. A demand for equipment. When we plan menus, we think about the training of our staff. What's our staff mix? Do they have the skills to prepare foods, or are we running a scratch kitchen or a convenience kitchen? Do we have the equipment? We also try to balance the use of that equipment when we plan our menus. So we can't pick something, we're going to cook something else if that particular piece of equipment's not available. We don't have room in the oven or room on the stove or that kind of thing. Um, so that is something that we have to think about. Um, then also, what about the process changes? An increased washing of produce, no pre-chopped produce, or change in preparation methods, like we talked about with the menu changes, that demand on equipment, that change in the workflow. How is that going to impact the system? You're going to increase the your cleaning staff, your whoever does the sanitation within the kitchen. You're going to have increased workload on them for increased cleaning and sanitizing where that produce has been, sanitizing the storage and display areas after that produce has been there. Then what about the staffing impact? It can impact either any part of your subsystem. It could impact your clinical staff. It can impact the food service staff because they may be sick. They may, if you are in an area where there's a lot of this outbreak, then they may be sick and not able to come to work. On top of that, you may have an increased patient census because if you, again, are in one of these areas where there is the larger concentration of the impact, you have an increased number of patients who may have to be hospitalized depending on how seriously ill they are. Combine that if you have that decrease in staffing due to some of your staff being ill. And then you may decide that you need to do just some re-education on food safety and hygiene habits, just as a general reminder as part of your in-service program. So these are probably just the tip of the iceberg of things that we need to think about as food service operation managers, because no organization, no food service organization wants to be the source of a foodborne illness or a foodborne outbreak. So you can see how something completely unplanned for, unforeseen, really makes a major impact on the running of your organization and on the output of your system. So let's look at another more common example that might happen in the hospital. What do you see here? What is this? Obviously, it's a patient tray, but it is an output of our food service system. Think about when we talked about the functional subsystems. Think about the what went into producing this tray. So here are functional subsystems. Every single part of our system, every part of these subsystems had something to do with producing that tray. So what if you're the new clinical dietitian, you're up on the floor and the nurse stops you, you've gone up to see the patients in the morning, and the nurse says, the trays are late. What's the problem? Who's responsible? Why is this a problem? Well, why is it a problem? Well, patients are hungry. Patients aren't getting their food. It's been a long time since they had supper last night, so they're hungry. They may be on regimens where their food and their medicine need to be particularly timed. Diabetic, for example, or someone's taking thyroid medicine or any number of medicines that may be impacted by their food. Maybe they're scheduled for a procedure and it's timed so that they can have their breakfast, have a period of time, and then go to their procedure. So this is impacting the patients. It's impacting the nursing schedule. It may delay them from passing meds or doing other things that they need to be doing in mourning for their patients. So we're thinking about what happens if purchasing doesn't order enough food, or at the last minute it was discovered that that food was spoiled, or if tray assembly is delayed. At the last minute, we discover that the food's not at the appropriate temperature, so it can't be served. What if we discover, again, at the last minute, the service elevators are down? So instead of taking the dedicated elevator that'll get the tray or food carts quickly up to the units, we have to compete with the staff and visitors for the public elevators, and that's going to take a lot longer. So there's any number of reasons that could cause something like that to happen. Now, does the patient care what happened? No, they don't really. They just want their food. They want their food on time. They want it hot. We're not looking for an answer in order to blame someone. Why are we looking to determine where the breakdown was? Why do we want to know that? Obviously, we want to, yes, correct that, and we want to correct it in such a way, improve the process to avoid the same thing happening again in the future. And then think about also how a glitch in the process might be mitigated if we didn't communicate to the nursing staff, if we didn't communicate to the other staff somehow that we are having a problem and the trays are going to be late. Communication goes a long way in smoothing over some of the issues. It doesn't change the fact that the trays are going to be late. It doesn't change the fact that that's a problem that we need to fix. But communicating with the staff and with the patients is a big part of management, and it's a big part of making the operation run smoothly. So what does a manager do? Managers coordinate activities of the subsystems of the organization, and we categorize management functions in these 5 different areas: planning, organizing, staffing, directing, and controlling. So planning is determining in advance what should happen, right? And again, our plans we're just assuming, for our typical day-to-day plans, we're assuming that things are going to go well, things are going to go right. So the plans establish our organizational goals and objectives and set up the policies and procedures for reaching those goals and objectives. So the initial plans are the goals and objectives of the organization, and they provide the basis for then the policies, procedures, and the methods for the subsystems to meet those goals and objectives, to meet the mission of the organization. And for us, that is, in the food service example, to feed the patients, to feed the staff, to provide good clinical care. And as we look at the what is to be accomplished, as the specificity of the plan increases, the number of plans increase. So for example, if our goal is to provide food and nutrition care in a safe manner, we get more specific as we create those policies and procedures and methods for each area of our subsystem to meet that goal and objective. So the next part, our next function of management, is organizing. Organizing is the process of grouping activities together, delegating authority to accomplish those activities, providing for coordination of the relationships, and facilitating decision-making. An example of is an organization chart, and you can see that in this little graphic on the right. It's my right. It's one of the primary reasons for organizing in the traditional format is to determine the pattern of relationships in the organization. It provides a guide to formal relationships and duties, and it shows a differentiation in the departments within that subsystem and the activities that those different departments or functional subsystems perform. One of the most critical aspects of management is staffing, and it's defined as the recruitment, selection, training, and development of people. And one of the other things that the manager does is determine the appropriate number and skill mix of the employees, and that that is determined by the goals and objectives of that organization. Now, directing is the next management function that we talk about. That's the continuous process of making decisions, conveying those decisions to subordinates, and ensuring the appropriate actions take place. The managing involves interaction with other people and understanding how we affect others and how we're affected by them. When managers direct others, they use that understanding to ensure that tasks are accomplished and that the work of the organization is completed. And last but not least is the controlling function. And the controlling function is to ensure that plans are being followed. And it involves comparing what should be done with what is being done. So measuring actual performance and comparing it against standards. And you can see here some examples are temperature checks, inventory management, portion control, financial accountability, those kinds of things. And so we're looking at that deviation. Is there a gap between the actual performance and the desired performance? And if there is, we're taking corrective action. So that would be an example of where we've looked in our late tray example where there's a deviation, something has happened, and we need to take corrective action to mitigate that gap. So when we go back to this, our late tray example, I want you to take a few minutes to think about which management function do you think is most important in our, if the breakfast trays were late, and why? So I've just listed the 5 functions of management there on the side, so you can refer to those. But think about it on your own for a couple of minutes, and then I want you to pair up with a partner and discuss, and then we'll get back together as the full class and we'll share and talk about what you think. Okay, I put some of your examples up here, and I just ordered them in the same order we talked about the management functions. And there were some of you who said that planning was most important, because if there had been a better plan that for staffing or for production, then the trays probably wouldn't have been late. So planning is most important. And then there are others of you that said organizing is more important, because maybe people aren't assigned to the right job. So maybe somebody didn't know what their job was, or they got changed at the last minute, or the workflow wasn't right. So something went wrong in the organizing component of the management. And then another one said staffing. Maybe there aren't enough employees, or maybe they're not trained well enough. So that's the most important thing that applies here. Then other groups said that directing was an issue because the manager needed to do a better job communicating with everybody and help the staff solve the problem before it became a problem, before it got as big as it did and the trays were laid up to the floor. Other groups said that it's the controlling function that's most important, because the manager should have noticed that trays were late before patients complained or before it was an issue to the nurse. And then there also were a couple of groups who said they don't think it's just one function. I think that it's all of them. And the interesting thing is that none of these answers are wrong. Probably every function of management would go into looking at and trying to solve what happened when the trays were late. The difference is we decide as a manager, what is the priority at the time? What do we need to look at first? And that's one reason why management is so challenging. And it's usually something different every day, because managers are constantly making decisions while balancing patient safety, employee satisfaction, efficiency, quality, all of those different things. So we're looking at many different things at any one time. And you just have to determine what's the priority of handling those issues if you find issues within each of those areas. So now let's broaden our discussion a little bit. And it's an issue that may or may not be related to our late tray example. So As the as the food service director, you now discover that patient satisfaction scores have declined. Remember that patient satisfaction is another output of our system. We want our patients to be satisfied. We want to meet their expectations. We want to exceed their expectations. So we're going to measure that and make sure that is happening. So we found out that patient satisfaction scores have declined. So what management function is this when we're looking at patient satisfaction scores? Right, it's controlling. We're measuring the actual performance against our standard and seeing if there's a gap. So we found, yes, there's a gap. And those standards that we set, they're either the standards that we have chosen, or they're standards that maybe an accrediting body or regulatory agency has set for us. So not only are we wanting to meet patient expectations, we need to meet those regulatory requirements as well. In this case, we're measuring the patient's satisfaction with the level of care that they've received for us, and we may be measuring many different aspects of care. So we are starting to look at this problem, but we don't want to throw everything at it at once. We need a little bit more information. So what other information would we need? We want to gather information to determine, do we truly have a problem? Is this a one point in time? Or do we really have a problem? So we want to know the time frame. Is it just a short term, something short term, and now it's returned? We take a quick look and a snapshot, and satisfaction scores have gone back up, or have they gradually been declining? And now we've gone from 95% last month to 70% this month. And as we kind of mentioned in the last example, hopefully as the manager, we're keeping a good eye on that, and we aren't going to be blindsided by something like that. But we want to know the time frame. What part of the system might be affected? What aspect of service has caused the dip in satisfaction? Was it late trays? Was it, were the trays inaccurate? Were patients not receiving the food that they ordered? Was the food cold? It's hot food cold and cold food hot, what should have been? Was the wrong food delivered? So we want to try to pinpoint really what went wrong. So again, we can pinpoint that part in the process and see where we need to improve. And improve our steps. What else do you want to know? What else do we want to know? Is it everywhere? Right. Is it one particular unit, or is it throughout the entire hospital? And then when we look closely, is it an internal influence from within our functional subsystem, or is it an external influence? Is it something from something happening within the hospital that's impacting our ability to satisfy our patients? And at that point, we would be able to determine if there's other departments we need to communicate with. And we also may want to communicate with the nursing staff anyway, the units, the staff on the different floors. Sometimes patients may talk to them and they may hear more comments from the patients than we do. There's more of them. They're around the patients all the time. So we may want to go to some of our coworkers and to find out what they know. And then we want to determine what kind of action we need to take. So why are we drilling down on the problem? Well, again, like I said, we don't want to just throw all kinds of resources toward something that may not be the issue. Our time and our monetary resources are finite. We just have a certain amount of them. So, and we want to be strategic. So we want to make sure that we're targeting whatever issue might be breaking down, or whatever part of our process might be breaking down. We may need to look at new equipment. We may need to look at retraining staff. We may need to look outside of our department. But again, remember that we're not doing this to blame a person, blame a process. We're looking at this in order to improve. Okay, today we laid the foundation for understanding the food service organization as a dynamic system, one where every subsystem affects the whole. We also connected systems thinking to the core management functions you'll use throughout your careers. As we move forward this semester, you'll see how these concepts show up in real operational challenges and how effective managers use them to maintain stability, quality, and patient safety. Before leaving, I want you to take out your phones and complete this quick exit ticket. You'll answer 3 questions. One thing I learned today is, one question I still have is, and which management function do you think will be most challenging in practice? Okay, take a few minutes to do that, and I look forward to our next class where we'll build on what we started today by looking more closely at workflow models and how managers anticipate and prevent breakdowns in the system. Thank you.